Hello and welcome to our special programme In Conversation with the Bridge Builders. 1 year ago, to mark 50 years of China-UK full diplomatic ties and to celebrate the ice-breaking spirit pioneered by a group of British businessmen 70 years ago, we launched the Bridge Builders series, the stories of 20 people and their families who've devoted themselves to expanding understanding between China and the UK, bringing the two countries closer together in the process. Today, some of our bridge builders are here to share more about their journey. But first, at the launch of this project, China's ambassador to the UK, His Excellency Zheng Zeguang, spoke to us about what people can do individually to build bridges of friendship, encouraging everyone to do the same. 1 year on, the ambassador has another message for us, delivered by Mr. Yang Shaoguang, Chargé d'Affaires at the Chinese Embassy in the UK.
As we celebrate the Chinese New Year of the Rabbit, CGTN Europe's holding of the In Conversation with the Bridge Builders event is truly meaningful that adds to the festivities of the New Year. On behalf of the Chinese Embassy in the UK, I would like to extend warm congratulations to CGTN Europe for its successful special series, To the Future Together, featuring bridge builders of friendship between China and the UK. I would also like to extend New Year's greetings from the bottom of my heart to Chinese and British friends attending this event. On 25th January 2022, President Xi Jinping sent a congratulatory message to the Icebreakers 2022 Chinese New Year celebration hosted by the 48 Group Club. In his message, President Xi fully acknowledged the first generation of ice speakers in the 1950s, represented by Mr. Jack Perry, for their historical contributions to China-UK relations, and encouraged visionary people and entrepreneurs in both countries to carry forward the ice-breaking spirit to promote the China-UK friendship in the new era. President Xi's message has greatly inspired people from all walks of life in our two countries who care about and support the growth of China-UK relations. The 20-episode special series, To the Future Together, run by CGTN Europe, represent in a vivid way the stories of 20 bridge builders. Their extraordinary stories are deeply touching and inspiring, and their contributions to the China-UK friendship deserve our respect. Over the past half-century, it was because of their hard work, of Mr. Jack Perry and the other icebreakers like him, that China-UK relations continued growing despite ups and downs. On the journey ahead, for China-UK relations to overcome obstacles and keep moving forward, we need more bridge builders of the new era to brave difficulties and carry on our friendship. Cooperation serves the fundamental interests of both the Chinese and British people and meets the trend of times. Only by following the principles of mutual respect and win-win cooperation can China-UK relations move forward smoothly. In the new year, the Chinese side will proceed from the fundamental interests of the people of both countries and work with visionary people from all walks of life in the UK to remove disruption and obstacles in the ice-breaking spirit. Through dialogue and cooperation, we will advance China-UK relations along the right track. To conclude, I wish the In Conversation with the Bridge Builders event a full success, and I wish you all a happy Chinese New Year. Thank you.
Yang Shaoguang, Chargé d'Affaires at the Chinese Embassy in the UK, addressing us there. Now, from the original ice-breaking mission to this bridge-building journey, China and the UK have grown to be important partners in various fields and have achieved great things working together. Let's hear now from Frank Slevin, who's chairman of the UK National Committee on China.
It's a great pleasure and honour to be joining you all here today, and I'd like to particularly thank the organisers for bringing this esteemed group of panellists together at the commencement of the Year of the Rabbit. Now, as a rabbit myself, and I'll let you work out what year that might be, I believe this is a year that will need thoughtfulness indeed, and it will need careful reflection in decision-making if we are to deliver success. Now, as an independent educational non-for-profit, the UK National Committee on China is dedicated to fostering a better understanding and better decision-making on China through education and through more dialogue between the people of Great Britain and Northern Ireland and the People's Republic of China. But what was vital in the founding of the UK NCC was also a desire to amplify voices from across all of the regions, all of the home nations and regions of the UK, to provide an opportunity to build region-to-region dialogue, city-to-city engagement, particularly on those pressing issues where real progress can only be made through direct and practical cooperation to build bridges. Now, the UK NCC has played a key role in bringing our academic and business communities together to address these shared challenges and to seek out shared opportunities and solutions. But of course, such cooperation in the future will only be possible through long-sighted nurturing of respectful and open exchanges. And our political, business, and academic institutions need to come together. The lifting of COVID restrictions, the resumption of international travel, and the shared need to prioritise international economic growth and cooperation on issues of common interest and concern, such as climate change, present a picture that we haven't seen for probably now nearly 3 years, one of opportunity. But we in the UK, and with an eye on UK interests, must ensure that we're not left behind and that we remain at the forefront of promoting understanding and encouraging dialogue between the UK and China. Although it is the Year of the Rabbit, I am, however, reminded of the Chinese parable of the frog in the well. If we think too small, if we act too slowly, if we sit complacently, we risk becoming like the frog in the bottom of the well. The frog thinks the sky is only as big as the small opening at the top of the well. However, if the frog climbs out of the well, they get an entirely different view of the size and scale of the sky. So I'm very much looking forward to hearing the insights from our many panellists this afternoon on how we can work together to further strengthen the ties between our nations across education, the arts, science and technology, continuing to build those bridges.
Frank Slevin there, chairman of the UK National Committee on China. Throughout the last year, we've been hearing from our bridge builders themselves, men and women who've worked to break down some of the barriers between China and the UK. Here, they tell us how they've done it.
What I decided was my main mission, to understand China and how it worked.
So I tried to see China as a process rather than a fixed point.
Choosing to represent China at the Olympics was a very natural decision for me.
My family has been connected with China now for almost 150 years. My task now is to set us up for the next 150 years.
It was only when I got to know my Chinese father in my 40s that I really got to know the other half of myself.
I feel quite a little bit proud that we've maybe brought something together, and so two different cultures can see that we're not that different.
You take 50% Chinese wisdom, 50% British wisdom, put them together, that's the secret to a happy family life.
I've ridden across China from north to south, from east to west, and from west to east. So I've done probably 30, maybe 35,000 kilometers on a bike in China.
Just try and film China as it is and interact with local people in a polite way, as everyone should.
I met a lot of very friendly people, I ate a lot of incredible food, and I learned a fascinating language. I think it was like experiencing a new life.
For cross-cultural understanding, I think food is a really good place to start because it's one of the most accessible ways to share culture.
My dream for the future is to become the world's first non-Chinese master chef.
I hope that Chinese fashion community and British fashion community could be more frequently communicating with each other.
I'm writing songs with Chinese influence, with Chinese instruments. I'm exploring, I'm experimenting, I'm trying something new, all in the hopes to build a bridge.
My whole sort of working life has been to do with Chinese books. The whole project of bringing Chinese conservators over, bringing Chinese cataloguers over, that is the thing that I'm most proud of in the library.
I have a great kind of desire to make the Chinese civilization more accessible to foreign people.
I've spent 50 years working with Chinese civilization in various ways in Chinese language, and I've never stopped benefiting from it.
There is no age and gender difference in our spirit, no race difference in our soul.
Because, respect, understanding, even affection are things that motivate us as human beings.
We have sown seeds which in China have grown to very big trees. We have helped people to avoid discrimination. I couldn't have conceived at the beginning that I could have achieved anything remotely like what we have.
What gives me the greatest feeling of success is seeing people develop. I thoroughly enjoy every moment of my engagement with China.
It's time for a short break, but when we come back, we'll be talking in person to some of the bridge builders to find out just how they've changed people's perspectives.
Roger, Ricky, last clear.
We can try out the wild and crazy ideas.
Nothing can stop an idea whose time is coming. This idea is coming.
I actually feel quite comfortable in isolation.
We should all be very basic when we're trying to save the world.
Awesome! We hope it will happen. We have to live in hope.
Welcome back to CGTN's special programme In Conversation with the Bridge Builders. And with me now are three of them. First of all, we have Stephen Perry, who's chair of the 48 Group Club. We have Zoe Reid, who's chair of the Society for Anglo-Chinese Understanding. And we have Toto Guo, who is a vlogger, model and host. Welcome. It's great to have you all with us here today to have this conversation. And you all, of course, have your different perspectives on China and the UK and the relationship between them. I want to start with you first, Stephen Perry, if I may. Despite not being Chinese, China's always been a really big part of your life through your father. But even so, you've said you've made it your mission to understand China and how it worked. Is that still a work in progress, do you think?
I think it is. I mean, you mentioned my father. It all started when I was a little boy, and he made the first trip to China, taking a business group with him for the first time, and they did the first trade deal between China and the West. It's 1953, and that was where the name Icebreakers came from. And when I joined him after university, I found myself involved in lots of different types of trade, but the one that caught my imagination most was after reform and opening up started, I put together a deal to put the filters, sometimes I don't feel too brilliant about saying it, put the filters on Chinese cigarettes. And I was told that it would be almost impossible to do because of the complexity of the Chinese system. So I started then to work out what this complex system was about. And it took me probably 15 or 20 years to come to understand what it is. And now, of course, China's changing yet again to the new era and the 2049 100th anniversary. And I can tell some of the things that are going on. And people tend to look at China and think what is happening today is China. But of course, it comes from a fantastic past, and it's going to a very well thought through future. And if you can understand that process, you have a much better understanding of what China is about.
So an evolving situation then. Zoe, being Chinese for you, that was something you only really identified with sort of later on in your life, wasn't it? Do you think it's shaped you being from two cultures and perhaps coming to that realisation later on?
That's quite an interesting question. I mean, basically, I was born and brought up in UK as a daughter of a single British mum and didn't track my father down until 25 years ago now. So I tracked him down to mainland China. And so I had that experience of arriving in China and suddenly realising I could have been Chinese. Half of me was Chinese, half of me was British. And it's been a growing lesson over 25 years, getting to know my Chinese family, getting to think about the way they see the world and the way I see the world. And all the many misunderstandings and understandings and differences of approach and view has helped, I think. All things help shape your view of the world, don't they? But obviously having that two cultural perspective has certainly shaped my views on how things are and how things should be.
And so you really have a mixed cultural perspective as well, let's say parents both Chinese and from the UK. What have been the advantages and perhaps the difficulties of having those two backgrounds?
Well, I think first off the bat, I'd say that it's been much more an advantage than a disadvantage. You know, I think much like Zoe, you know, I grew up largely here with a pretty much British background. You know, my dad was Chinese, but we didn't go to China. You know, I think we had 2 or 3 holidays, no Mandarin in the house, nothing, you know. And I think especially growing up in London, it was a very London background, you know, so not really understanding much about China and yet having this identity. For me, I thought, you know, it could be a disadvantage, it could be a negative thing, a barrier. For some of my friends who are also mixed, it was, you know, because they felt like they didn't really belong anywhere. So they're sort of caught between these two worlds. But I thought, you know what, actually, if I look at it from a positive perspective, if I use this, you know, as best I can, actually I'm learning from two completely different backgrounds, even if, you know, we're not speaking Mandarin, we're not in China, but I've still got influence from two different parents who are from completely different parts of the world. You know, so I think just having two different people inform who you are as you grow up, you know, it's really important. And I think that's one thing that's been a huge advantage. And then I think just in general terms, like when you meet people and you say, I'm half Chinese, you know, it's an icebreaker, right? We're all icebreakers here. You know, it's a great way to start a conversation. People, on the whole, aren't inherently prejudiced. You know, most people are fascinated by, you know, if you're from a different culture, what's that all about? What's that like? So for me, I always thought it was a way to, you know, give myself a bit more color, you know, so that was great. And I think for my work, you know, as a performer, I think when in terms of castings and things like that, actually it's helpful, you know, to have this sort of image. So in lots of ways, I think it's been a huge advantage. And I think that especially as I got older, finally taught myself Mandarin, went to China to work, it was like opening up yet another door, you know. And I think that if we, you know, use this difference and celebrate that, for the most part, people are going to be very ready to accept that and to celebrate that too. You know, so for me, it was always an advantage. Yeah, yeah.
And I asked this to Stephen, but do you think, as you say, you went to live in China in your 20s, do you think that helped you understand the country more?
Definitely, definitely. You know, before that, actually, when I was growing up here, even though I wasn't really Chinese, I'd always say I was, you know, because I wanted to be different. You know, I wanted to perform, I wanted to celebrate my background. So I'd always say, I'm a Chinese dude, you know, I'm Chinese Toto. And that was sort of part of me growing up as a teenager. And then when I finally went there, I realized, oh my God, you know, on the first day I looked around, I kind of felt like I was coming home in a sense. on the first day realized, oh my God, my Chinese sucks. I really am a Waigoren, as they say, a foreigner. You know, I've got a lot to learn. And then it was really like opening up a whole new door, and all these things that I'd got little tidbits from, going to restaurants with Chinese family members in the UK when I was younger, holidays, things like that. Suddenly that all became my entire environment, you know, and I had to really learn and just get involved. And so that was like a huge, you know, new sort of path for me, new door, yeah.
And Zoe, I wanted to ask you the same question, because you know, you met your family in China in your later life, let's say. Did that change your perception of China?
Absolutely. I mean, the first thing was suddenly realising that I was with a whole population that were the correct height. You know, 5 foot. You know, I suddenly loved it, and that sensation on the undergrounds and on the obviously back then in 1997, China was very different to how it was now, and I've had the privilege of watching it change and grow enormously and develop. But you suddenly understand that the picture you have in the West is not the reality of what it's like in China, and the warmth and the friendliness and the interest. And I always say this, I'm not sure all my family agree, but I think my Chinese family have adapted more to our ways than we've adapted to theirs over the 25 years. I mean, they've shifted amazingly, and they're amazingly open to learning new ways and new ways of thinking, whereas we remain stuck in a Western construct of what China's like. So it's a fascinating journey to be on.
And Stephen, I wonder if I could ask you about the China that your father knew. What's changed, do you think? Obviously, you've had this long-standing relationship with. That's a big question, I realise, but I mean, what do you think has changed, especially in the way that the people from outside the country are able to engage with China?
I mean, the China that my father saw, he was one of the first to go back in after '49, was a poverty-stricken country with terrible diseases and famines and all sorts of things. The Chinese turned that to a strength. They learned to deal with that, and they turned the country into one that was basically self-sufficient. And then they decided to develop. And there's a lot of arguments that go on in the process. But the Chinese story of recovery, the return of China, is just a phenomenal story. And I'm not sure whether any other country in the world could do what they have done. But they've done it with a quarter of the world's population. For me, the China that I came across sometime later, probably 30 years after my father first went there, 20 years, was beginning to become something which I felt the need to understand. Today, if you go to China, there's so much understanding of the West that it's much easier to just try and absorb life in China. But from 1972, when I first went, it was about understanding all the features of the Cultural Revolution and so on, and then the reform and opening up, and now the new era. The Chinese people have a tremendous commitment to hard work. They have a tremendous commitment to learning from others, so you don't get that resistance that you do in the West. And what they're doing now in turning China back into a major global power hasn't been seen for hundreds of years. And they found the need to be in the world, and they found the need to have the world in China. And so it's a great opening up experience, but I think it'll last, that transition, at least 100 years.
And Zoe talked about the Western perception of China. Do you think that's changed as well?
I think the Chinese understand us much better than we understand them. That's because their approach to anything is to organize themselves so that they can understand all the different ways. And if you interact with the Chinese and you're from the UK or from Europe or whatever, then they have a great deal of programs that are on that tell them about us, and they do a lot of studies of us. You know, if you want to look at the Chinese health system, it comes from studying the NHS. It comes from studying the health systems of Europe and America. So the depth of understanding and research in China on any subject is phenomenal. We have tended not to have China in our schools. We don't study Chinese history. We don't study the impact of China on the world. We don't study the Chinese language anywhere near adequately. So we have less. But you find that British people who come into contact with China suddenly are motivated to understand this very different country. Yin and yang and all those different things begin to buzz. And it does help when you've got some of the best food in the world. And it does help when you have traditional Chinese medicine.
And Toto, I wonder if perhaps if I can designate you as a younger person, but do you think that younger people have perhaps a greater willingness to throw aside these preconceptions and maybe are perhaps more open to learning new things and trying new things?
Well, firstly, I'll say I'm not as young as I look. It's deceptive. But I think they are, and yet I still think Orientalism or some form of it still exists. And a lot of my friends, for example, as much as they want to know about Chinese culture and they find it cool and they want to embrace it, there's still this sort of fear, and there's this sense of like it's a miserable place where the people are miserable and they're very controlled and they're not happy. And yet the ones that have gone there have realized that actually it's a totally different ball game. And there are elements which are better off here and elements which are better there. But I think for the most part, perceptions are getting better, and I think that social media and television and things like that are helping. So I really hope it gets better.
And you're, of course, someone who is doing something about that through your social media, trying to sort of break down those barriers and inform people.
Sure.
I wonder, the people who comment on your videos and the people who engage with you on social media, what kind of things do they want to know? What do they learn, and what do you perhaps learn from them?
I think it's very different depending on which platform it goes on, and if people are watching it from inside China or watching it in the West on YouTube and things like that. But I think the ones who really feel the most influenced by it are the ones who recognize that it really is not so much a celebration of young Asian people or culture or performance. I mean, it is on the surface, but it's also just a celebration of people who want to show themselves no matter where they're from. And so a lot of the videos and a lot of what we do is about bringing people together and just sort of showing that we're all the same ultimately.
And Zoe, you've talked about you said the real China, that you've talked about the importance of telling the true China story. How do you think we can best do that?
I think it's really interesting. I mean, I'm the chair of SACU, the Society for Anglo-Chinese Understanding, and we've got a growing number of young people who've, like Toto, who've lived and worked in China, British people, but who've come back and want to remain in contact with China, but who want to tell the true story because they say their experience there was of a great life for a young person, and they were able to express themselves, able to enjoy the society and the company, and so they're back annoyed by the image they see sort of projected, the sort of that grey, controlled image is not their experience, and so sort of continuing to think about how we can do people-to-people stories and engagement, how we can get the stuff you bring through so that people can really see the real life in China, we think is a really important sort of piece of work to get involved in.
Stephen, you're nodding. Do you agree?
Yeah, I mean, my field is mostly business, and business is a smaller sector, but it is the lead sector. It's what's opened up the doors, and it's given people the opportunity to interact. But I think both Zoe and Toto are absolutely right. We've got an enormous distance to cover to enable the two peoples to understand each other, feel comfortable with each other, to remove this sense of China's a dark and a dull place, and the Chinese people are all controlled and contained. It's not as if the Chinese don't travel. They travel more than anybody. And they're really interested in foreign cultures and foreign ways of doing things. At the same time, they never lose their own culture. And what this is about is 3,000 years of history. It's in the Chinese, and it's wonderful to find it and to understand it. But it's also true that they want to be part of the world, and they want to break down this barrier between Asia and the West. And it'll be very interesting in the next 20, 30, 40, 50 years, with some of the things that are going on in the world, to see how we're going to have that with some sort of separation. That's not going to work. The people of Asia and the people of Europe want to interact, and they will.
And you have, of course, done lots of business in China, as you say. Do you think there's a misconception about the way to succeed in doing trade, in conducting business with China?
There are some people who think that we can do business as the UK in Asia without being engaged with China. You know, it doesn't matter where you go in Asia, the Chinese are there. They're interacting with the rest of Asia. They want to build Asia, not just China, but Asia. And if we want to engage with Asia, then we have to engage also with China. And it will happen, because the one thing about business that I've learned is it doesn't matter what barriers you put up, people find ways of going through them. And that will happen in business. And then the sorts of things that you do, both do, will lead the way. I'm so delighted to be here with you and to praise your work. It's the key. Ours is just business.
And Zoe, you of course the chair of the Society for Anglo-Chinese Understanding. Do you think that people are finding a way through those barriers, and what can be done to help it?
I mean, I think, of course, as Stephen says, people will always find ways around, and because of the active interest. I think what we want is to get more active interest from the British side to want to learn more about China, and that's why it's so exciting to have more people joining the society who've got those connections and want positively to do that. And it's quite a harder job this way round than the other way round. But as Stephen says, the sort of the passion and the interest is there on both sides, and I think we'll make the way forward.
I want to come back to this idea of opening up, which we've all sort of talked about. We heard in the past few weeks from China's Vice Premier Liu He, who said the door to China will only open up wider. There's quite a lot of elements to that, but I want to ask you particularly, Stephen, about the economy. What do you think that will mean in terms of business and the economy, both for China and the UK and perhaps globally?
I mean, China's transformed the business of the world in the last 30, 40 years. Their growth is 30% of the world's growth, and their innovation is ahead of any other nation in the world. You know, if you go back 15, 20 years and you sort of take the 20 top sectors in the world and the top 3 or 4 companies in that world, in one there was a Chinese company. And now I would say there's probably 7, and in relatively short space of time, in all 20 there will be Chinese companies. They are growing enormously. So they're impacting on the innovation in the world, they're impacting on the demand on the world, and they're impacting on the supply of the world. And somehow for some people to think that because our systems are different, we're going to be able to be separate, it's not going to happen. The amount of interaction and the amount of need we have to solve the problems of climate, of energy, of health, they're so important to work together that we're going to find more and more the pressure to work together. So we're going to have to understand how to have these different systems and be able to work together. And that isn't just about the West coming to terms with the fact that China is a single-party state. That is a key part of it. But the other part of it is that the Chinese need to understand how to manage to work with the West in a way that doesn't feel to the West as though China's trying to overpower. And I think that that's capable of being done. I don't think that if you look at 3,000 years of history, the Chinese have never wanted to overpower other countries nearby. They now, because of their studies anyway, know that if you want to be an empire, you end up like us, that you were an empire, not can stay an empire. So they're looking very hard at how to be an Asian country with other Asian nations and work together. And I think that will lead to the breaking down of barriers with Europe and Africa. Those 3 continents are all connected. There's no sea that comes in between them. And I think we're going back to a world where those 3 different continents will begin to phase into each other, and the different political systems will become less significant. But we'll see. I won't be here to see.
Well, on a different level, though, when it comes to opening up, obviously we've seen travel back after a break. And how important is it, do you think? I mean, how much is that human connection, do you think, important in kind of breaking down these barriers?
I think the first thing I say to any friends when I meet them is that when you experience and when you meet young Chinese people, you will be surprised by how proud they are. And this phrase, "I love you, China," which is normal speech in China, you know, people say it all the time. Actually, to me, what it means is it's just a celebration, and it's not a barrier, it's not a wall, it's not us saying we are better or we are like this and we cannot change and we cannot grow and we don't want to explore. Actually, like Stephen said, they do all want to explore, they do want to travel. And this pride for me is a positive thing. And so any positive patriotism and any community feel and any love that's shared, and I think you feel that when you're in China, for me, is a great thing. You know, so we have to get over that fear and that notion of being proud of your country means that you're controlled or that you're not proud or you're not interested in other countries, which is totally not true.
So what do you think?
I think it's it is. People need to understand we're all one human race, aren't we? And we need to try and welcome diversity of perspectives. And in a sense, it should be something that London's good at. We have a very diverse population. We need to all learn to sort of broaden our understanding that people can come from different perspectives, but still work together on a common good and a common way forward. And I think, when I really I remember my niece, and as a teenager when I first met her, saying, "I love my country," and really understanding what that means to them. But as you say, the Chinese come from such a different place. As a young girl, she embraced the whole of China's 3,000-year history in a way I just don't think we do. We live in now. We just simply don't take that long view, and so I think there's so much, as you say, to bring the two together, isn't there? There's so much to get the benefit from all the perspectives coming on the key issues of the world, like climate change. Bringing all that together, I think, would be such a great advantage for everybody.
So you've all talked about, in different terms, a lack of understanding, perhaps a knowledge gap on both sides between China and the UK. A question for you all, really, how important is it to build bridges between China and the UK? Why should we be feeling positive about a shared future? Let me start with you, Stephen.
Goodness me, I probably need notice of that question and then try and work out what my answer is. The history of the world, particularly in Europe, is of fighting each other, of world wars and killing. And it's about power and it's about empire. And that does advance the world at the same time as it causes pain. I think we're now in a world which is beginning to say we don't want that anymore. We don't want empires. We don't want overpowering of each other. We want to live in peace with each other and solve the major problems of the world, like climate change, like the weather, all sorts of things like that. And if we're going to do that, we're going to have to do it together. And I think it is really what you've brought out in this exchange. It's the young people that will do that. Maybe my generation has had some part to play in beginning a transition, but the big transition is going to come because the young people say, well, actually, we want to travel to each other's countries. We want to learn with each other, but we also want to solve the problems of the world together rather than with a division. So the leaders have got to work out how to enable the young people to get together, because they'll solve it.
How to build bridges and how important is it?
I mean, if we go right back to the founder of SACU Society, Joseph Needham. So back in the in the 40s and the 50s, and then he founded SACU in the 60s. He was saying, let's go to China and discover the wealth of the science that was so ahead, and the history going back, and then try to bring that back to Britain. So we're building on a foundation, if you like, of early bridge builders who were so aware of what we're missing out on by not welcoming China and working together on everything. So that needs to continue. I think all of us have a part to play. I think particularly in the fields of medicine, science, I think the collaborations are happening, and it needs to continue to be encouraged and to celebrate, because we have these common problems that we will solve together if we work together. So bridge building needs to continue, comes from a long way back, and we all have our part to play, actually.
And Toto, what do you think? How do we build on what we've started?
I wish I had the answer. But I think that the importance of bridge building is paramount, and I think that there are two different types of bridges, right? We've got the sort of more superficial bridges, and then we've got the real strong bridges, and I think that if people can continue, as Zoe's doing, building cultural bridges, and Stephen building business bridges, and I think these are the key things, and it's these sectors that I think will affect it the most, because on a personal level, most people can build their own bridge very quickly, and these types of global bridges will take longer, and I pray that it will, go that way.
And Stephen, when it comes to sort of sectoral cooperation, the business and the economy and trade, obviously a key one. How positive are you about that future relationship? How do you see it looking?
We've got some barriers in front of us at the moment. There are some difficulties, but if we learn from what hasn't quite worked correctly, then we'll get it right. It's dangerous to mention this word, but I'm going to mention it. If we take what went wrong with Huawei, and we ask ourselves, how do we in the West benefit from all their innovation with 5G without having this security fear? If we address that question, we would find an answer. But instead, we moved to very stereotyped reactions to it. And there was also a belief that somehow systems need to change in order for us to be able to have 5G from China. I think we have to be prepared to ask those questions openly to each other and to give the answers openly to each other. I don't think China will find out on its own how to work with the West without the West helping to work out how is the right way to do it. So I'm talking mainly about business, but all the general interaction that's talked about by these two splendid people is around the question of how do we open the avenues. And in my experience, and I may be wrong, business is the one that can do it. And business has to find how do you break down this stereotyping that happens once China becomes too big for the West. In the end, we have to work out how to benefit from each other. I think it'll happen.
Let's wait and see. What a wonderful conversation. Thank you so much indeed for talking to us today. It was fascinating hearing from you all. Many thanks to our guests today, Stephen Perry, Chair of the 48 Group Club, Zoe Reid, who's Chair of the Society for Anglo-Chinese Understanding, and Toto Gore, who's a model and cross-cultural influencer. We'll leave you now with some messages from our other bridge builders. But from me and the team here in London, thank you for watching and goodbye.
But what I've found in China is that almost everything I knew about the country, and to this day, almost everything I read about it is wrong.
I am honored to be able to make connections between people, culture, and the civilization.
To me, being a bridge builder means being someone who connects people together using their specialities and talents in their chosen fields.
Everyone and anyone can be a bridge builder by encouraging friends, family, and those around to look at a different culture in a different way and challenge prejudice.
The videos that I make are intended to entertain and educate, and hopefully they're doing exactly that.
Building bridge is embedded into my day-to-day life and work. I will carry on and encourage others to do the same.
There are some challenges, of course, when different cultures play a role in other countries, but these can be overcome with understanding.
If I continue to learn about Chinese culture and Chinese language, I can understand even more aspects of the country and present those aspects to audiences outside of China.
I hope that by continuing to represent China in a traditionally British sport, I can promote understanding and curiosity in both Chinese and British culture.
I plan to continue my bridge building journey by travelling to more places in China, learning more about local cultures, and sharing all of my experiences in my music and videos.
I am hopeful for a long-term positive future, and I look forward to a closer collaboration between UK and China.
We need better cross-cultural communication. We need more visits to each other's countries. We're complementary to each other, and we need to think more in that way.
My hope for China-UK relations over the next 50 years is that areas of cooperation can be identified and then acted upon with a clear view of the benefits that can be achieved.
The bridge between China and the UK is slowly being built, piece by piece.
I wish everyone a happy Chinese New Year. 祝大家新年快乐，兔年大吉。
I wish you health, happiness and good fortune. 新年快乐，兔年大吉。
Or if you're a Cantonese speaker, 新年快乐 or 新年快乐 in Mandarin. Happy New Year, everyone.
在这腊尽春暖、新春到来之际，我祝福大家新年快乐，万事如意。When winter comes, the spring is not far. I wish everyone a happy and healthy New Year.